The cowboy came home to a stranger standing in his kitchen covered in flour and honey. And for one dangerous second, Yates Callahan reached for the pistol at his hip before he noticed she was crying. It was the spring of 1873, and the Arkansas hills around Eureka Springs had been blooming with dogwood for 2 weeks. But Yates had not once stopped to notice the white flowers against the green mountainsides, because a man living alone had no time for beauty. He had time for cattle and fences and the endless work of keeping a small ranch alive in the Ozark foothills, and he had time for the occasional trip into town for supplies and whiskey. But he did not have time for a woman in his kitchen, especially not one who looked like she had fought her way through hell to get there. She was younger than him by maybe 5 years, putting her somewhere in her middle 20s, and she had dark hair that had escaped from its pins to hang in sweat-dampened strands around her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder and stained with mud and what looked like blood, though whether it was hers he could not tell from where he stood in the doorway. She held a wooden spoon in one hand like a weapon, and her eyes were wide and frightened when they met his, gray as rain and just as turbulent. "I am sorry," she said, and her voice shook with exhaustion or fear or both. "I needed somewhere to go. Your door was unlocked." Yates let his hand drop away from his gun and took off his hat, an automatic gesture of courtesy his mother had beaten into him before she died. "Madam," he said, because he did not know what else to say, "are you hurt?" She shook her head, then seemed to reconsider and nodded instead, lifting her free hand to show him scraped knuckles and a wrist that had started to swell. "I fell running. I think I twisted it. Running from what?" Her mouth tightened into a thin line, and she looked away from him, back down at the table where she had apparently been trying to make biscuits, despite being in a stranger's house with an injured wrist. There was flour everywhere, dusted across the rough wooden surface and the floor, and even streaked across her cheek like war paint. The bowl she had been using was cracked down one side, leaking sticky dough, and Yates recognized it as the one his mother had brought west from Missouri before the war, before everything changed. "Men," she said finally. "3 of them. They have been following me since Van Buren." Van Buren was 30 miles west through difficult country, and Yates felt something tighten in his chest at the thought of a woman traveling that distance alone with men tracking her. "Where is your horse?" "I do not have one. I walked." "You walked 30 miles. She lifted her chin in a gesture that was equal parts defiance and desperation. "I have walked farther." Yates set his hat on the hook by the door and moved into the room, watching the way she tensed as he approached but did not back away. She was braver than she looked, or more stubborn, or perhaps she had simply run out of places to retreat to. He could see the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes and the way she swayed slightly on her feet, as if standing upright required more strength than she had left to give. "Sit down before you fall down," he said, pulling out one of the 2 chairs at his small table. "I will look at that wrist." She hesitated for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to read his intentions written there. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because she lowered herself carefully into the chair and set the wooden spoon down on the table. Yates fetched the basin of water he kept by the door and a clean cloth from the shelf, then knelt beside her chair to examine her wrist. It was swollen but not broken, he thought, just badly sprained from the way she winced when he touched it. "What is your name?" he asked as he worked, wetting the cloth and wrapping it gently around the injury. "Emmeline Gray," she said. "Most people call me Emma." "I am Yates Callahan." "Most people call me Yates." She made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had contained any humor. "I suppose I should thank you for not shooting me when you came in." "I thought about it," he admitted, and this time her laugh was real even though it was brief. But you looked like you were having enough trouble with those biscuits without adding a bullet wound to your problems. Emma looked back at the ruined dough on the table, and fresh tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over to track through the flour on her cheeks. "I cannot even manage something as simple as biscuits," she said, and there was such defeat in her voice that Yates felt uncomfortable, as if he was intruding on something private. "You are hurt and tired and probably half-starved," he said gruffly, standing up and moving to the stove. "No one makes good biscuits under those conditions." He built up the fire and put coffee on to boil, then fetched bread and cold beef from the larder and set them on the table. Emma stared at the food like she did not trust it to be real, and when he nodded at her to eat, she fell on it with a hunger that confirmed his guess about when she had last eaten. She tried to maintain some dignity while she ate, but desperation won out, and Yates turned away to give her privacy and to hide his anger at whoever had reduced her to this state. When he heard her movements slow, he turned back and poured coffee into 2 tin cups, setting one in front of her and taking the other for himself. She wrapped both hands around the cup despite the heat and breathed in the steam like it was medicine. "Tell me about these men," he said. Emma's hands tightened on the cup. "They work for my uncle, or they did work for him before he died. Now they work for themselves and they think I am their property." "Why would they think that?" "Because my uncle used me as collateral in a card game 6 months ago and lost. When he died 2 weeks ago, they came to collect what they considered a debt." Yates felt his jaw clench. "A man cannot use another person as collateral. You can tell them that when they arrive. I do not think they will listen." She took a sip of coffee and closed her eyes. "I ran the night they came for me. I have been running ever since. Why Eureka Springs? I did not plan to come here specifically. I was just trying to stay ahead of them." She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. "I saw your ranch from the road and your door was unlocked, and I thought maybe I could rest for an hour. I thought maybe I could make biscuits." Her voice broke on the last word. "My mother taught me to make biscuits before she died, and I thought if I could just make them once more I might remember what it felt like to be safe." Something in Yates's chest cracked at the desolation in her voice. He had been alone for 5 years, ever since his father died and left him the ranch, and he had told himself he preferred it that way. Solitude was easier than company. Silence was easier than conversation. But looking at Emma Gray sitting at his table with tears drying on her face and flour in her hair, he felt the weight of his isolation like a physical ache. "You can stay," he heard himself say, "until you figure out what to do next." Emma stared at him. "You do not even know me. I know you walked 30 miles to get away from men who think they own you. I know you broke into a stranger's house to make biscuits. That is enough." He drained his coffee and stood up. "I have a spare room. It is not much, but it has a bed and a door that locks from the inside. You can rest while I finish the evening work. What if they come here looking for me? Then we will deal with it." He picked his hat up from the hook and settled it on his head. "But first you need to sleep." Emma rose from the chair, swaying slightly, and Yates moved to steady her with a hand on her elbow. She was so light he thought a strong wind might blow her away, and he wondered again how she had managed to walk 30 miles on foot. He guided her to the small room off the kitchen that had been his mother's sewing room once, long ago, and now served as storage for things he did not know what to do with, but could not bring himself to discard. There was a bed under the window, still made up with quilts his mother had stitched, and Emma looked at it like it was salvation. "Thank you," she whispered. Yates nodded and pulled the door closed, then stood in the hallway listening to the sound of her moving around the room, the creak of the bed as she lay down, and finally silence. He waited a few more minutes to be sure she was sleeping, then went back outside to finish his work, but his mind was not on the cattle or the fences anymore. His mind was on the woman sleeping in his mother's room, and the men who were following her and the danger that was coming toward his ranch like a storm rolling in across the hills. He worked until dark, checking the animals and securing the barn, then walked the perimeter of his property with his rifle in his hands. The moon was rising over the eastern hills, bright enough to cast shadows, and the night was full of the sounds of spring, frogs calling from the creek and owls hunting in the woods. Everything seemed peaceful, but Yates could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the moment Emma Gray stumbled into his life, his solitude had ended whether he wanted it to or not. When he finally went back inside, the house was dark except for the banked glow of the fire in the stove. He checked the door to the spare room and found it still closed, no light showing underneath, and he told himself that was good. She needed rest. He needed to think. He sat at the table in the darkness and cleaned his rifle and his pistol both, methodical movements that calmed his mind, and tried to plan for what would come next. 3 men tracking one woman through 30 miles of rough country meant they were determined. Determined men were dangerous. He would need to be ready. He must have dozed off at the table because the next thing he knew, there was light coming through the window, and the smell of coffee and something baking filled the house. Yates jerked upright, reaching for his gun before he remembered where he was and what had happened. And then he saw Emma standing at the stove with her back to him, her hair braided and pinned up, wearing the same torn dress, but somehow looking more solid than she had the night before. She turned when she heard him move and offered a tentative smile. "I made biscuits," she said. "For real this time." Yates stood and moved to the stove, looking down at the pan of golden brown biscuits that sat cooling on the sideboard. They looked perfect, round and tall, and exactly the way biscuits should look. "How long have you been awake?" "A few hours. I hope you do not mind. I borrowed some flour and lard." "It is fine." He poured himself coffee and took one of the biscuits, breaking it open to release a cloud of steam. The inside was light and fluffy, and when he bit into it, he tasted salt and butter and something else, something that reminded him of mornings when his mother was still alive and the house was full of warmth and sound. "It is good," he said, and saw Emma's shoulders relax slightly. "I told you my mother taught me," she said. She wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive gesture. "I know you said I could stay, but I should probably keep moving. I have already put you in enough danger." "You have not put me in any danger I did not accept when I offered you shelter," Yates said. He finished the biscuit and poured more coffee. "Besides, you cannot walk much farther on that wrist. Give it a few days to heal. A few days might be too long. Then we will deal with whatever comes." He met her eyes and saw fear there, but also determination. "I am not going to throw you out to face those men alone." Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Thank you. Again." They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, the biscuits supplemented with bacon and eggs from Yates's chickens, and afterward Emma insisted on cleaning up despite her injured wrist. Yates let her because he could see she needed to feel useful, needed to have something to do besides wait and worry. He went out to work and found himself thinking about her throughout the morning, wondering if she was all right, wondering if the men tracking her had gotten close enough to find his ranch. He came back at midday and found her sweeping the floor, moving carefully around the furniture. She had opened the windows to let in fresh air, and there were wildflowers in a jar on the table, purple and yellow blooms she must have gathered from around the house. The sight of them made something twist in his chest, because he could not remember the last time there had been flowers in this house. "You should be resting," he said. "I have rested enough. I am not used to being idle." She set the broom aside and wiped her hands on her skirt, Do you have anything that needs mending? I am good with a needle." Yates thought about the pile of shirts in his room with missing buttons and torn seams, repairs he had been meaning to make for months, but never found time for. "I might have a few things," he admitted. Emma smiled, a real smile this time that reached her eyes and transformed her face from merely pretty to something that made Yates forget what he was going to say next. "Bring them to me," she said. "I will fix them." He brought her the shirts and watched as she settled into the chair by the window with his mother's sewing basket, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, despite the bandage on her wrist. The domesticity of the scene unsettled him. A glimpse of a life he had stopped imagining was possible, and he retreated back outside to the safety of physical labor where the rules were simple, and the only complications were the weather and the livestock. But that evening when he came in for supper, he found the table set with plates and forks, something he never bothered with when eating alone, and Emma had made stew from the vegetables in his garden and the beef in his larder. It smelled incredible, rich and savory, and when he sat down to eat he realized he had been living on cold food and coffee for so long he had forgotten what a real meal tasted like. "You did not have to do all this," he said. Emma filled her own plate and sat across from him. "You are letting me stay in your home. The least I can do is cook." "I am not letting you stay out of expectation of payment. I know," she met his eyes. "But I need to feel like I am contributing something. I need to feel like less of a burden." "You are not a burden." She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just started eating, and they finished the meal in silence. Afterward, Yates helped her clean up, something he never did when eating alone because there was rarely anything to clean, and their hands brushed as they worked and Emma did not pull away. It was such a small thing, that moment of contact, but it echoed through him like thunder. That night he lay in his bed listening to the sounds of someone else in the house, the creak of floorboards as Emma moved around her room, the rustle of blankets as she settled into bed. It should have been intrusive, but instead it was comforting, a reminder that he was not alone in the darkness. He fell asleep thinking about biscuits and wildflowers, and the way Emma's hands moved when she sewed. The second morning she made biscuits again, and eggs with cheese melted over them, and Yates ate until he was uncomfortably full, because he could not remember the last time food tasted this good. Emma was moving more easily now, her wrist less swollen, and she had found an old dress of his mother's in the spare room and altered it to fit her frame. It was faded blue cotton, simple and practical, but on her it looked like something special. "I hope you do not mind," she said, gesturing to the dress. "Mine was falling apart." "It is fine. My mother would have wanted someone to get use out of it." He paused. "It looks nice." Emma blushed, actual color rising in her cheeks, and Yates felt absurdly pleased that his words had put it there. He finished his coffee and stood to leave, but Emma stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Yates, I need to tell you something." He sat back down, hearing the seriousness in her voice. "What is it?" "The men following me. They are not just angry about losing what they think they own. One of them, the leader, his name is Marcus Webb. He was involved in my uncle's business and I know things about what they did. Illegal things. If he catches me, he will not just take me back. He will kill me." Yates felt cold spread through his chest. "What kind of illegal things?" "Stealing. Mostly horses and cattle, but other things too. They had a network through 3 counties and my uncle kept records. When he died, I took the records because I thought maybe I could use them to buy my freedom, trade the information for safety. But Marcus found out and now he wants both me and the records. Where are the records now?" Emma reached into the pocket of her borrowed dress and pulled out a small leather-bound book, its pages worn and stained. "I have carried them with me since the night I ran." Yates took the book and flipped through it, seeing names and dates and transactions written in a crabbed hand. It was evidence of crime spanning years, enough to hang half a dozen men if presented to the right authorities. It was also a death sentence for anyone caught carrying it. "Why did you not go to the law?" he asked. "Because half the names in that book are law. Sheriff's deputies, town marshals, even a judge in Fort Smith. I did not know who I could trust, so I ran instead." She leaned forward. "I am sorry I brought this to your door. I did not mean to drag you into something dangerous." Yates closed the book and set it on the table between them. "Too late now. We are already dragged in," he thought for a moment. "There is a federal marshal in Eureka Springs, a man named Jack Dawson. I know him from before the war. If anyone can be trusted with this, it is him." "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be about anything." He stood again. "I will ride into town tomorrow and talk to him. Until then, we keep this quiet and we stay alert." Emma nodded, relief and anxiety warring on her face. "Thank you, Yates, for believing me, for helping me. You do not need to keep thanking me. I do, though. Most men would have turned me away or worse." Yates did not know what to say to that, so he just put his hat on and went outside, but her words followed him through the day's work. Most men would have turned her away or worse. The fact that she had learned to expect so little from the world made him angry. A slow, burning anger that had no outlet except to make sure she was safe. He came in at midday and found her in the garden, weeding around the vegetables with her sleeves rolled up and dirt under her fingernails. She looked up when she heard him approach and smiled, and Yates felt something in his carefully constructed solitude begin to crack. "The garden was getting overrun," she said. "I hope you do not mind." "I do not mind." He crouched beside her and pulled a few weeds himself, working in companionable silence. "I never have time to keep up with it properly. You need help running this place. I have managed alone for 5 years. Managing is not the same as thriving." Emma sat back on her heels and looked at him. "When was the last time you had a proper meal before I started cooking? When was the last time your clothes were all mended? When was the last time you noticed the flowers blooming?" Yates opened his mouth to argue but realized he did not have an answer. She was right. He had been managing, surviving, getting through each day with mechanical efficiency, but he had not been living. Not really. "I got used to being alone," he said finally. "That is not the same as wanting to be alone." She held his gaze and Yates felt exposed, like she could see through all his defenses to the loneliness underneath. He looked away first, pulling another weed with more force than necessary. "We should get back inside," he said. "Keep out of sight." Emma nodded and stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and they walked back to the house together. Yates spent the afternoon repairing a section of fence and trying not to think about what Emma had said, but it was like trying not to think about a stone in his boot. The discomfort was there whether he acknowledged it or not. That evening Emma made fried chicken and potatoes and greens from the garden, and they ate while the sun set through the windows and painted everything gold. Yates told her about the ranch, how his father had claimed this land just before the war and built the house and barn with his own hands. He told her about his mother, who had been a schoolteacher in Missouri, and how she had hated the isolation at first, but eventually came to love the quiet and the hills. He told her about losing them both, his father to a fall from a horse and his mother to fever, and how he had been alone ever since except for the occasional visit from neighbors too far away to really count as neighbors. Emma listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she told him about her own life. About growing up in St. Louis with parents who loved her but died when she was young, leaving her to be raised by an uncle who saw her as free labor and eventually something to be traded away. about learning to cook and sew and garden because those were the skills that might save her life someday, about dreaming of escape but never having anywhere to escape to until desperation forced her to run. "I used to think about having a home," she said quietly. "A real home, not just a place I was trapped. I thought about having a garden and a kitchen and maybe chickens. Simple things, but mine." "That does not sound simple," Yates said. "That sounds like everything." Emma smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "It does it not? But I learned not to hope for too much. Hope hurts when it does not come true." Yates wanted to tell her that she could have those things, that she could stay here and make this ranch her home, but the words stuck in his throat because they felt too large and too soon. Instead he said, "We will figure this out. We will deal with Marcus Webb and his men, and then you can decide what you want to do next." "What if what I want is impossible?" "Nothing is impossible, just difficult." She laughed at that, a real laugh that filled the kitchen with sound, and Yates realized he would do just about anything to hear that laugh again. The third day dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring morning that made the Ozark Hills look like something from a painting. Yates woke early and found Emma already in the kitchen making breakfast. Biscuits again, and bacon and coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. He sat at the table and watched her move around the space with increasing familiarity, knowing where things were kept and how the stove heated, and it struck him how quickly this had started to feel normal. "I am going into town today," he said, "to talk to Marshal Dawson." Emma's hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "Should I come with you?" "No. It is safer if you stay here. Lock the doors and do not open them for anyone but me." "What if something happens to you?" "Nothing will happen to me." He said it with more confidence than he felt. "But if I am not back by dark, take the horse from the barn and ride for the Mitchell place. They are 10 miles east and they will help you." Emma brought the food to the table and sat down across from him, but she did not eat, just stared at her plate. "I am afraid," she said quietly. "I know. I am afraid they will find me before we can do anything about them. I am afraid they will hurt you because you helped me. I am afraid that even if we deal with Marcus Webb, I will still have nowhere to go and nothing to my name." She looked up, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am afraid that for the first time in my life, I have found somewhere I might want to stay and it will be taken away from me." Yates reached across the table and took her hand, his rough fingers closing around her smaller ones. "I will not let that happen," he said, and meant it with every part of himself. "You are safe here. Whatever it takes, you are safe." Emma squeezed his hand and a single tear escaped to roll down her cheek. "Why are you doing this? You do not owe me anything. Maybe I am tired of being alone." The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest. "Maybe I like having someone to make biscuits for." She laughed through her tears, and Yates felt something in his chest expand, warm and terrifying and absolutely right. They finished breakfast holding hands across the table, and when Yates finally stood to leave he found it almost physically difficult to let go of her. "Be careful," Emma said from the doorway as he saddled his horse. "Always, Em." "Yates!" He turned back to look at her. "Come home safe." The ride into Eureka Springs took an hour through winding mountain roads still muddy from spring rains. The town was small but growing, drawn by the mineral springs that burbled up from the hills and were said to have healing properties. Yates guided his horse down the main street, past the bathhouses and hotels and saloons that catered to visitors seeking cures for whatever ailed them, and stopped in front of the small building that served as the marshal's office. Jack Dawson was sitting behind his desk cleaning a shotgun when Yates walked in, and he looked up with a grin that showed missing teeth from a fight years ago. "Yates Callahan. Hell, I thought you died out on that ranch of yours." "Not yet." Yates closed the door behind him and sat in the chair across from Jack's desk. "I need your help with something." Jack set the shotgun aside and gave Yates his full attention. "What kind of something?" Yates pulled out the leather-bound book Emma had given him and set it on the desk. Evidence of a theft ring operating through 3 counties. Names, dates, transactions. Everything you would need to build a case. Jack opened the book and flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. "Where did you get this?" "A woman came to my ranch 3 days ago running from men who want her dead. Her uncle was involved with this ring and kept these records. She took them when he died, and now the leader, a man named Marcus Webb, is hunting her." Marcus Webb. Jack closed the book carefully. "I know that name. He has been suspected of rustling for years, but no one could ever make anything stick. This book changes that. Can you arrest him? If I can find him. Do you know where he is?" Following the woman. "She thinks he is close, maybe a day or 2 behind her." Jack leaned back in his chair and studied Yates. "You are protecting this woman." "I am." "That is dangerous, Yates. Webb is not the kind of man to give up easy." "I know." Yates met his old friend's eyes. "But I am not giving her up either." Jack smiled slowly. "Like that, is it?" "I do not know what it is. I just know I am not letting him take her." "All right, then." Jack stood and buckled his gun belt around his waist. "Let me wire Fort Smith and see if we can get some deputies out here. In the meantime, you go back to your ranch and keep her safe. If Webb shows up, you send someone for me immediately." "Understand." "Understood." They shook hands and Yates left, feeling marginally better about the situation but still uneasy. He stopped at the general store to buy supplies, flour and sugar and coffee, and the storekeeper gave him a curious look when he added ribbon and a bar of fancy soap to the order. "Having company, Yates?" the man asked with a knowing grin. "Just stocking up," Yates said, but he knew the speculation would start as soon as he left. Small towns thrived on gossip, and a bachelor cowboy buying ribbon was news. He made it back to the ranch by mid-afternoon and found Emma sitting on the porch with his rifle across her lap, and the sight of her there defending his home sent a surge of possessive pride through him that he had no right to feel. "Everything all right?" he asked as he dismounted. "Quiet as church." She set the rifle aside and stood, but I felt better having it close. Yates carried the supplies inside and unpacked them while Emma watched from the doorway. When he pulled out the ribbon, pale blue and silky, she made a soft sound of surprise. "You bought ribbon?" "Thought you might like it, for your hair or something." He felt absurdly self-conscious, like a boy giving his first gift. Emma crossed the room and took the ribbon from his hand, running it through her fingers with a wondering expression. "It is beautiful. You did not have to do this." "I wanted to." She looked up at him, and the space between them felt charged, electric with possibility. Yates could see the pulse fluttering in her throat and the way her breath had quickened, and he knew if he kissed her right now she would not pull away. But he also knew she was vulnerable and scared and under his protection, and taking advantage of that would make him no better than the men she was running from. So instead he stepped back and cleared his throat. "I talked to Marshal Dawson. He is wiring Fort Smith for deputies. Once they arrive, they will go after Webb." Emma's expression shifted from something soft and open to careful and controlled. "How long will that take?" "A few days, maybe. A week at most. And until then?" "Until then we wait, and we stay ready." That evening Emma wore the ribbon in her hair, threaded through her braid so that it caught the lamplight and turned her dark hair to silk. She made supper again, rabbit stew and biscuits, and they ate while rain started to fall outside, soft spring rain that pattered against the roof and windows. After they cleaned up, Emma sat by the fire with more mending, and Yates sat across from her reading a book he had read a dozen times already. and the domestic comfort of the scene made his throat tight. "Tell me about before the war," Emma said suddenly. "What was it like here when your parents were alive?" Yates set his book aside and thought about how to answer. "Loud," he said finally. "My mother sang while she worked and my father whistled. There was always something happening, always work to be done, but also laughter. Sunday dinners with neighbors, Christmas with decorations and too much food. It felt full. You must miss them terribly. Every day, but you learn to live with loss, you have to." Emma set her sewing down and looked at him. "Do you ever think about having that again? A full house, a family?" "I used to, before I got used to being alone. And now?" Yates met her eyes and saw the question hidden underneath the question, the hope and fear warring in her expression. "Now I am starting to remember what I was missing," he said quietly. The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, and Emma stood and crossed to where Yates sat. She held out her hand, and after a moment he took it, letting her pull him to his feet. They stood close enough that he could smell the soap she had used, lavender and clean, and see the flecks of darker gray in her eyes. "I know this is fast," Emma said. "I know we have only known each other 3 days. But I need you to know that I am not staying just because I have nowhere else to go. I am staying because I want to be here. With you." Yates lifted his free hand and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing against the blue ribbon. "I am not offering you shelter to trap you here. If you want to leave once Webb is dealt with, you can. No obligations. What if I do not want to leave? Then you stay." Emma smiled, and it was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Then I will stay." Yates kissed her then, because there was nothing else to do, no other way to express the tangle of feelings in his chest. Her lips were soft, and she made a small sound of surprise before kissing him back with a hunger that matched his own. His hands found her waist and hers wrapped around his neck, and they stood there in the lamplight while the rain fell and time seemed to stop. When they finally broke apart, Emma was flushed and breathing hard, and Yates felt like he had been struck by lightning. "I should not have done that," he said. "Why not?" "Because you are under my protection, because you are vulnerable, because I do not want you to feel obligated." Emma laughed and pulled him down for another kiss, briefer but just as sweet. "Yates Callahan, I just told you I want to stay." I kissed you back. I am not some delicate flower who needs protecting from her own choices. I know. I just want to do right by you. You are doing right by me. You have been since the moment I stumbled into your kitchen. She rested her head against his chest, and Yates wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "I have never felt as safe as I do right here." They stood like that until the fire burned low and the rain slowed to a drizzle, and when Emma finally pulled away to go to bed, Yates caught her hand one more time. "Thank you for the biscuits," he said. "That first morning. Thank you for trying even when everything was falling apart." Emma squeezed his hand. "Thank you for not shooting me." She disappeared into her room, and Yates banked the fire and checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. Then he lay in his own bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Emma settling down for the night, and wondered how he had gone from fiercely protecting his solitude to desperately wanting to end it in the span of 3 days. The answer came as he was drifting off to sleep. He had not wanted to be alone. He had just been waiting for the right person to come along and remind him what he was missing. And Emma Gray, with her courage and her tears and her biscuits, had done exactly that. The 4th morning, Yates woke to the sound of horses in his yard and bolted out of bed with his gun in his hand. He threw open his door and nearly collided with Emma, who was standing in the hallway, fully dressed with the rifle he had left by the door. "3 riders," she whispered. "I saw them from the window." Yates moved to look out and felt his blood run cold. 3 men were dismounting in front of the house, trail worn and hard-looking, and the one in the lead had a cruel face and a gun belt slung low on his hips. Marcus Webb. It had to be. "Go back to your room and lock the door," Yates said quietly. "No, I am not hiding while you face them alone." "Emma, please." "No." She met his eyes and her jaw was set in a stubborn line. "We face them together or not at all." There was no time to argue because someone was pounding on the door, hard enough to rattle the frame. Yates positioned himself in front of Emma and called out, "What do you want? Open up, Callahan." The voice was rough and impatient. "We know you have the girl. Send her out and we will leave peacefully." "I do not have anyone here but myself." "Do not lie to me. We tracked her here 3 days ago. Now open this door or we will break it down." Yates looked at Emma and saw fear in her eyes but also defiance. He made a decision. "The door is unlocked. Come in if you want, but I am armed and I will defend my property." The pounding stopped and there was a moment of silence. Then the door swung open and Marcus Webb walked in followed by his 2 companions, all of them with guns drawn. Webb was younger than Yates expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes that were flat and empty of anything resembling mercy. "There you are," Webb said, looking past Yates to Emma. "You led us on quite a chase, girl." "I am not going with you," Emma said, her voice shaking but clear. "That is not up to you. You belong to me, bought and paid for, you and that book you stole." "I do not belong to anyone." Emma stepped out from behind Yates despite his attempt to keep her back. "And the book is already in the hands of the federal marshal." Webb's expression darkened. "You are lying." "I am not. Marshal Jack Dawson has your records. He is wiring Fort Smith right now. By tomorrow there will be deputies swarming these hills looking for you." For a moment Webb looked uncertain, then he lunged forward and grabbed Emma's arm, yanking her toward him. Yates moved without thinking, bringing his gun up and placing himself between Webb and the door. "Let her go," Yates said, and his voice was deadly calm. "Or what? You will shoot me." Webb twisted Emma's arm until she cried out. "You are outnumbered, Callahan. Even if you get me, my men will kill you, maybe, but you will be dead either way." Yates did not take his eyes off Webb. "Is that worth it to you?" Webb hesitated, and Yates saw calculation in his eyes, weighing his options. Then another voice spoke from the doorway. "Let the lady go, Webb." Everyone turned to see Marshal Jack Dawson standing in the entrance with a shotgun leveled at the room and 2 deputies flanking him with rifles. Webb's men started to raise their guns, but Jack shook his head. "Do not be stupid. You are already looking at hanging for what is in that book. Do not add murder to the charges." Webb's grip on Emma loosened and she twisted away, stumbling back to Yates's side. He caught her with his free arm and pulled her close, his gun still trained on Webb. "How did you get here so fast?" Webb asked Jack. "I never went back to town yesterday. Figured you might be close, so I camped nearby to keep an eye on the place." Jack gestured with the shotgun. "Now drop your guns and put your hands up. All 3 of you." For a long moment no one moved. Then Webb seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him as he realized he was caught. He dropped his gun on the floor and his men followed suit, raising their hands in surrender. The deputies moved in to bind their wrists while Jack kept the shotgun trained on them. "You all right, Yates?" Jack asked. "Fine." "Emma," she was shaking but she nodded against his chest. "I am fine." "Thank you, Marshal." Jack tipped his hat to her. "Just doing my job, madam." He turned back to Webb. "You and your boys are going to Fort Smith to stand trial. That book you kept has enough evidence to put you away for 20 years, maybe more. Hope whatever you were planning to do with this lady was worth it." Webb glared at Emma with such hatred that Yates instinctively stepped in front of her to block his view. "You will regret this," Webb spat. "Both of you." "I doubt that," Yates said evenly. "Now get out of my house." The deputies hauled Webb and his men outside and loaded them onto horses, and Jack lingered in the doorway to talk to Yates and Emma. "You two did good," he said. "That book is going to break open a whole network of thieves and put a lot of bad men behind bars. You should be proud." "I am just glad it is over," Emma said quietly. "For you it is. You are free and clear, no charges or anything." Jack looked at Yates. "You planning to keep her around, if she will have me?" Jack grinned. "Something tells me that will not be a problem." He touched his hat brim and left, the sound of horses fading as the group rode away toward town. Yates closed the door and turned to find Emma staring at him with wide eyes. "That was terrifying," she said. "I know. He could have killed you, he could have. But he did not." Yates holstered his gun and pulled her into his arms, feeling the way she trembled against him. "It is over now. You are safe." Emma wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight, and they stood like that for a long time while the morning sun streamed through the windows and the last of the danger faded away. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. "I need to make breakfast," she said. "You do not need to do anything. We can just rest." "No, I need to do something normal, something that makes sense." She wiped her eyes and moved toward the kitchen. "I am going to make biscuits." Yates watched her gather flour and lard and salt, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. And he realized this was how she processed fear and relief, by creating something good and warm and solid. He sat at the table and let her work, offering help when she asked for it. And by the time the biscuits came out of the oven golden and perfect, the house smelled like home again. They ate in silence, but it was comfortable now, the kind of quiet that came from understanding rather than lack of words. When they finished, Emma started to stand to clean up, but Yates stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Marry me," he said. Emma froze, staring at him. "What? Marry me? Stay here. Make this ranch our home instead of just mine." The words tumbled out faster than he could organize them. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 4 days. But I have been alone for 5 years, and I do not want to be alone anymore. Not now that I have had you here making biscuits and mending clothes and putting flowers on the table. Not now that I know what I have been missing." Emma sat back down slowly. "Yates, you do not have to marry me just because you helped me. I do not expect that. I am not asking because I helped you. I am asking because in 4 days you have made me remember what it feels like to be alive. Because I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is whether you are all right. Because when I kissed you, it felt like coming home after being lost for years." He took her hand. "I am asking because I am falling in love with you, and I do not want to waste time pretending I am not." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks, but she was smiling through them. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I started falling the moment you did not shoot me. Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." She laughed and leaned across the table to kiss him, soft and sweet. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will stay. Yes to everything." Yates felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that went bone deep. He stood and pulled her out of her chair and kissed her properly, without the fear and desperation of the night before, just pure joy and relief and the beginning of something that felt like forever. "When?" Emma asked when they finally broke apart. "As soon as possible." "Tomorrow, if we can manage it. People will talk. They will say we are rushing. Let them talk. I have spent 5 years not caring what people think. I am not starting now." Emma laughed again and rested her forehead against his chest. "Then tomorrow it is." They rode into Eureka Springs the next morning dressed in their best clothes. Yates in a clean shirt and vest, and Emma in another dress she had found in his mother's trunk and altered to fit. The dress was pale green with small white flowers embroidered at the collar, and with the blue ribbon woven through her hair, Emma looked beautiful enough to stop Yates's heart. The preacher was a thin man with kind eyes who asked if they were sure about this, given how recently they had met. And Yates said yes with enough conviction that the preacher did not ask again. The ceremony was simple, performed in the small church with Jack Dawson and his wife as witnesses, and when Yates slipped the ring on Emma's finger, a gold band that had been his mother's, he felt the last piece of his solitude fall away. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Yates did, in front of God and witnesses and anyone else who cared to watch, and Emma kissed him back with enough enthusiasm that Jack's wife giggled, and Jack himself coughed loudly. When they pulled apart, Emma was blushing but grinning, and Yates could not remember the last time he had felt this happy. They rode back to the ranch as the sun climbed toward noon, and when they arrived, Yates dismounted and lifted Emma down from her horse, then carried her over the threshold of the house, because his mother had told him once that was how it was done. Emma laughed and protested that she could walk, but Yates did not put her down until they were inside with the door closed behind them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Callahan," he said. Emma's eyes went bright with tears again. "Mrs. Callahan, I like the sound of that." They spent the afternoon in a haze of joy and discovery, learning each other in the way newlyweds did, and by the time evening came, they were both exhausted and starving. Emma made supper while Yates sat at the table and watched her move through what was now truly her kitchen, and he thought about how empty this house had felt just 5 days ago. How silent and cold and lonely. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked as she brought food to the table. "How you changed everything in less than a week." She sat down and reached for his hand. "You changed everything for me too. 5 days ago I was running for my life with nowhere to go. Now I have a home, a husband, a future." "What kind of future do you want?" Emma thought for a moment. "I want to wake up every morning in this house and make breakfast. I want to plant a bigger garden and maybe get more chickens. I want to learn how to ride a horse properly and help you with the ranch work. I want to make this place thrive instead of just survive." She paused. "And someday, when we are ready, I want children. Lots of them to fill this house with noise and laughter the way it used to be." Yates squeezed her hand. "That sounds perfect." They ate and cleaned up together, moving around each other with increasing familiarity. And when they went to bed that night, it was in the same room. Emma's things moved from the spare room into what was now their shared space. Yates held her close in the darkness and listened to her breathing slow and even out as she fell asleep. And he thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to his door, if his door had been locked that morning, if he had come home an hour later, if he had been a different kind of man who turned away women in trouble. Any of those things and he would still be alone, still going through the motions of living without actually experiencing life. But Emma had stumbled into his kitchen covered in flour and fear and changed absolutely everything. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair, even though she was sleeping. Emma stirred and mumbled something that might have been biscuits before settling back into sleep, and Yates smiled in the darkness. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and ancient, as if they had been living this way forever instead of just days. Emma took over the household work with an efficiency that amazed Yates, organizing his scattered possessions and repairing years of neglect. She expanded the garden until it covered twice the space it had before, planting vegetables and herbs and flowers in neat rows. She made curtains for the windows from fabric they bought in town, pale blue to match her ribbon, and suddenly the house felt warmer and more welcoming. Yates taught her to ride, patient with her nervousness and celebratory when she finally managed to trot without gripping the saddle in terror. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her with his arms around her to steady the rifle, and ignored the way his neighbors raised eyebrows when they visited and found Emma Callahan armed and capable. He taught her the work of ranching, how to mend fences and doctor sick cattle, and 100 other tasks that made the difference between success and failure. In turn, Emma taught him things he had forgotten or never known. She taught him to laugh again, to find joy in small moments like fresh bread or wildflowers or rain on the roof. She taught him to talk about his feelings instead of burying them under work and silence. She taught him that being vulnerable with another person was not weakness but strength, that sharing his fears and hopes and dreams made them more bearable and more real. By the end of the first month, Yates could not imagine his life without her. The house felt alive again in a way it had not since his parents died, full of light and sound and warmth. Neighbors who had stopped visiting during his years of isolation started coming around again, drawn by Emma's friendly demeanor and the way she always had coffee ready and something baking in the oven. Sunday dinners became a regular occurrence with the Mitchells and the Dawsons and other families from the area, and Yates found himself part of a community again, instead of just a man living on the edges of one. Summer came, and with it the hard work of haying and branding, and Emma insisted on helping despite the heat and difficulty. Yates tried to argue that ranch work was too rough for her, but Emma just gave him a look that had become familiar, equal parts fond exasperation and determination. "I am not some delicate flower, Yates Callahan. I walked 30 miles to escape danger, and I will certainly manage to help with your cattle." So she helped, and proved herself capable and tireless, earning the respect of the hired hands who came for the branding. By the end of the summer, she was as tanned and strong as any ranch woman, her hands calloused and her face freckled from the sun. Fall arrived with cool mornings and leaves turning gold in the hills, and Emma announced that she was pregnant. Yates felt fear and joy in equal measure, remembering his mother's difficult pregnancies and the dangers of childbirth on the frontier. But Emma just laughed at his worried face and told him women had been having babies forever and she would be fine. "Besides," she said, resting a hand on her still flat stomach, "I am not doing this alone, I have you." Winter came and Emma's belly grew round while the world outside turned white and cold. She nested like a bird, reorganizing the house and sewing baby clothes from scraps of fabric, and Yates watched in amazement as she prepared for this new life they had created. The spare room became a nursery with a cradle Yates built from oak and a rocking chair Emma claimed from the attic and repaired. Christmas came, and they celebrated with the Mitchells and the Dawsons, the house full of people and laughter and too much food. Emma made pies and bread, and those perfect biscuits that had started everything, and everyone agreed they had never tasted better. Jack Dawson pulled Yates aside at one point and said, "You are a lucky man, Yates. Hold on to her." "I plan to," Yates replied, watching Emma across the room as she talked with Jack's wife, her face glowing with happiness and health. The baby came in early March on a morning when the hills were starting to bloom with the first signs of spring. The labor was long and difficult, and Yates paced the kitchen while the midwife and 2 neighbor women attended to Emma in the bedroom. Every cry of pain from behind the closed door made him flinch, made him want to break down the door and make it stop somehow. But finally, after hours that felt like years, he heard a different sound. A baby crying, thin and outraged and absolutely perfect. The midwife emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Callahan, big healthy boy, and your wife is tired but fine." Yates nearly fell over with relief. He went into the bedroom and found Emma propped up on pillows looking exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered and smiled, tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said. Yates sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the small red face peering out from the blankets, at the tiny fingers curled into fists, and the dark hair matted against the baby's head. He felt his throat close with emotion so strong he could not speak. "He is perfect," he finally managed. "He looks like you," Emma said. "Same serious expression." Yates touched one of the baby's hands and watched in wonder as tiny fingers wrapped around his larger one. "What should we name him?" "I thought maybe James, after your father." Yates looked at his wife and felt love surge through him so powerful it was almost painful. "James Callahan. I like it." They sat together while the midwife cleaned up and the neighbor women cooed over the baby, and Yates thought about how much his life had changed in less than a year. He had gone from a man alone, and convinced he wanted to stay that way, to a husband and father surrounded by love and noise and chaos. And it had all started with Biscuits on a desperate morning when a scared woman broke into his house and reminded him what he had been missing. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant worry and moments of pure transcendent joy. James was a good baby, healthy and hungry and curious about everything. Emma recovered her strength quickly and returned to managing the household with the baby on her hip or sleeping in a sling she made from an old shawl. Yates learned to change nappies and warm bottles and walk the floor at midnight singing songs his mother had sung to him. Summer came again, and with it more work and more help. Neighbors and hired hands who stopped to admire James and bring gifts for the growing family. Emma's garden flourished, and she spent long hours teaching their son about plants and dirt and growing things, even though he was too young to understand. Yates watched them together and felt his heart expand to accommodate more love than he thought one person could hold. Fall arrived and James was sitting up, then crawling, then pulling himself upright on furniture and taking wobbling steps. Emma and Yates followed him everywhere, ready to catch him when he fell, celebrating each new milestone like it was a miracle. In quiet moments, Yates would hold his son and tell him stories about his grandparents, about the ranch and the land and the importance of family. James would stare at him with serious eyes, as if he understood every word. When James was almost a year old, Emma announced she was pregnant again, and Yates felt the same mixture of fear and joy as before, but also confidence. They had done this once. They could do it again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and Emma stayed active through the winter, chasing after their son while her belly grew. The second baby came on a cold January morning, a daughter they named Sarah after Emma's mother. Sarah was smaller than James had been, but just as healthy, with Emma's gray eyes and a fierce temperament that became apparent immediately. She wanted to be held constantly, and cried if anyone tried to put her down, and Emma laughed and said she had spirit. Yates secretly worried that having two children so close together would be too much for Emma, but she seemed to thrive on the chaos, managing both babies with a grace that amazed him. The years passed in a pleasant blur of noise and work and love. James grew into a serious boy who followed Yates everywhere, learning ranch work almost before he could talk. Sarah grew into a wild thing who climbed everything and feared nothing, giving her parents constant heart attacks with her adventures. Emma got pregnant again when Sarah was 2, and this time they welcomed twin boys, Matthew and Samuel, who looked identical and seemed to communicate without words. The house that had been so silent and empty when Yates lived alone was now bursting with life and sound, exactly as Emma had envisioned. There were toys scattered across every surface and small boots by the door, and laundry always hanging to dry. There were arguments and laughter and tears and triumphs. There were scraped knees and lost teeth and endless questions about everything. There was never a quiet moment, and Yates loved every second of it. He would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch Emma in the kitchen with children swirling around her like a tide, cooking or cleaning or mending, while answering questions and settling disputes and dispensing hugs. She would look up and catch him watching and smile, that same smile she had given him the first time she made biscuits that actually worked. And Yates would remember how close he had come to missing all of this. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Emma into town for a rare evening alone, leaving the children with the Mitchells, who had children of their own and did not mind the chaos. They had dinner at the hotel restaurant and walked through the town holding hands like young courtiers, and Emma laughed at how strange it felt to be out without children hanging off them. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked as they sat on a bench overlooking the spring that gave the town its name. "Taking a chance on a stranger who offered you shelter." Emma turned to look at him with surprise. "Regret it? Yates, you gave me everything I ever dreamed of, a home, a family, safety, love." She took his hand. "I regret nothing except that I did not find you sooner. I was not ready sooner. I needed to be alone long enough to appreciate what I had when you arrived." He kissed her forehead. "You saved me, Emma. I was just going through the motions before you came along. You reminded me how to live." "We saved each other," Emma said softly. "I was running from danger with no hope and no future. You gave me both." They sat in comfortable silence watching the stars come out, and Yates thought about that first morning when he came home to find a stranger in his kitchen making biscuits. He thought about how suspicious he had been, how close he had come to sending her away. He thought about Marcus Webb and the danger they had faced and how easily things could have gone wrong. But they had not gone wrong. Against all odds, they had gone incredibly right. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked. "Biscuits," Yates said, and Emma laughed. "Of course you are. Do you remember what you told me that first morning? That you thought if you could make biscuits you might remember what it felt like to be safe." "I remember." "Are you safe now?" Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am home. That is better than safe." They went back to the ranch late that evening and relieved the Mitchells of their children, who were already asleep and had to be carried to bed. Yates carried James while Emma managed Sarah, and they made multiple trips to retrieve the twins. When all four were tucked in and the house was finally quiet, Emma and Yates collapsed into their own bed, exhausted but content. 10 more years of this?" Emma asked. "At least," Yates replied. "Maybe 20 if we are lucky." "I am already lucky." "I have been lucky since the day I walked into your kitchen covered in flour." Yates pulled her close and kissed her, slow and deep and full of the kind of love that only grew stronger with time. "I forgot I ever lived alone," he said against her lips. "By that third supper when you made fried chicken and potatoes, I could not imagine life without you anymore." "Good," Emma said, "because you are stuck with me now, me and 4 children and whoever else comes along." "Whoever else?" Yates pulled back to look at her. "Emma, are you saying—" "I am saying that 10 years and 4 children later you should know by now that I have no intention of slowing down." She grinned at his expression. "Are you complaining?" "Never," Yates said fervently and kissed her again. The years continued to pass with the relentless forward momentum of time. James grew into a young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, serious and capable like his father. Sarah became a force of nature who announced at 15 she wanted to be a doctor, an ambition so unusual for a girl that Yates did not know how to respond. Until Emma reminded him their daughter had never done anything the conventional way. The twins grew into their own people despite looking identical, Matthew quiet and bookish while Samuel was all action and adventure. And there were more children, just as Emma had predicted. Another daughter named Rose who looked exactly like Emma and had her mother's gift with growing things. Another son named William who arrived unexpected and late, but was loved no less fiercely for being a surprise. The house expanded to accommodate them all, new rooms added as needed, and still, it sometimes felt too small for all the life contained within it. Emma's hair started to show silver at the temples and Yates's back sometimes hurt after long days of work, but they were healthy and happy and surrounded by family. The ranch prospered under their combined management, growing from a modest operation into one of the most successful in the county. They bought more land and more cattle and hired hands to help manage it all, creating jobs and opportunity for others the way Jack Dawson had helped them all those years ago. Neighbors came and went, some moving away and new families arriving, but Yates and Emma remained constants in the community. Their house became known as a place where anyone was welcome, where there was always food and coffee and a listening ear. Emma especially became someone people turned to for advice or help. Her combination of practical wisdom and genuine compassion making her beloved throughout the area. On their 20th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. All 6 children plus grandchildren starting to arrive from James, who had married a girl from town. The house was bursting with people and noise and laughter, exactly as Emma had always wanted. Yates stood in the doorway watching the chaos and felt Emma slip her hand into his. "Happy?" she asked. "Beyond measure," he replied honestly. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not broken into your house that morning, all the time? And then I stopped thinking about it because it is too terrible to contemplate." Emma laughed and squeezed his hand. "You would have been fine, lonely maybe, but fine." "No," Yates said seriously. "I would have been merely existing. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. You gave me all of this." He gestured at the crowded house, at their children and grandchildren and the life they had built together. "I was drowning in silence before you came along and made everything loud and messy and perfect." "It is rather loud and messy," Emma agreed with a smile. "But I would not change a single thing." They stood together watching their family, and Yates remembered the empty house he used to live in, remembered the silence and isolation he had convinced himself he wanted. He remembered coming home to find a stranger making biscuits and thinking his life was about to get complicated. He had been right about that. It had gotten incredibly complicated. It had also gotten indescribably better. James approached with his young son on his shoulders, the boy who looked like a miniature version of his grandfather. "Dad, Ma, we are going to take a family photo. Everyone outside." They all trooped out to the front yard, 3 generations of Callahans gathering in the spring sunshine. The photographer from town who Emma had hired for the occasion arranged them carefully, tallest in back and smallest in front. And Yates stood with Emma beside him and their children and grandchildren surrounding them, and felt almost overwhelmed with gratitude. "Everyone smile," the photographer called. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. The camera flashed, and Yates knew that years from now, when he looked at this photograph, he would remember this exact moment. The warmth of the sun and the sound of his family and the feel of Emma's hand in his. He would remember how it all started with a woman desperate enough to break into a stranger's house to make biscuits. How she made those biscuits the first morning, and by the 3rd supper he had forgotten he ever lived alone. How she had taken his half-lived life and made it whole again. After the photo session, the celebration continued inside with food and music and stories, told and retold. Sarah entertained everyone with tales from medical school, making her mother proud and her father slightly terrified at the things she had learned. The twins got into a good-natured argument about cattle breeds that ended with both of them laughing. Rose showed off her latest sketches of plants and flowers. William, still young enough to be unself-conscious, demonstrated a card trick he had learned. As evening approached and some guests started to leave, Yates found Emma in the kitchen washing dishes, despite protests from their daughters that she should rest, and let them handle it. He picked up a towel to dry and they worked in companionable silence, the sound of their family in the other room a pleasant background noise. "Thank you," Emma said suddenly. "For what?" "For keeping your door unlocked 20 years ago. For not shooting me when you came home. For believing me when I told you about Marcus Webb. For asking me to marry you after only 4 days." She set down the plate she was washing and turned to face him. "For giving me the life I never dared to hope for." Yates set down his towel and took her hands, looking at the woman who had stumbled into his kitchen and changed absolutely everything. Her hair was more silver than dark now, and there were lines around her eyes from smiling, but she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "You gave me that life too," he said. "I was just taking up space before you arrived. You made me want to live again. You made me want to build something that would last." He squeezed her hands gently. "Every biscuit you make, every flower you plant, every time you laugh, I remember how close I came to missing all of this. And I am grateful. Every single day I am grateful." Emma's eyes filled with tears and she leaned up to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of 20 years of love and partnership. When she pulled back, she was smiling through her tears. "We should probably rejoin our family before they come looking for us," she said. "Probably," Yates agreed, but neither of them moved. They stood in the kitchen holding hands while the sounds of their family filled the house around them, and Yates thought about how perfect this moment was. How perfect all of it was, the messy, chaotic, loud, beautiful life they had built together. He had spent 5 years alone convincing himself he preferred solitude, and then Emma Gray had shattered that illusion in less than a week. She had made biscuits that first morning, standing in his kitchen crying and covered in flour. By the third supper he had kissed her and asked her to stay. And now 20 years and 6 children later, he could not remember what silence sounded like, could not imagine waking up without her beside him, could not picture a future that did not include her and everything they had created together. "Yates," Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Where did you go?" "Just thinking about biscuits," he said with a smile. Emma laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been 20 years ago. "You and those biscuits. I make them almost every morning and you still act like they are magic." "They are magic," Yates said seriously. "They brought you into my life. That is the most powerful magic I know." She shook her head, but she was smiling, and they finally left the kitchen to rejoin their family. The evening continued with more food and stories and laughter, and eventually the guests departed and the children drifted off to bed until only Yates and Emma remained, sitting on the porch in the darkness watching the stars. "Another good day," Emma said softly. "Another good year," Yates replied. "Another good life. Are you getting philosophical in your old age, maybe? Is that allowed?" Emma laughed and rested her head on his shoulder. "Everything is allowed. We made it this far, we can do whatever we want." They sat in comfortable silence listening to the night sounds, frogs and crickets and the distant call of an owl. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept, safe and warm and loved. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and prosperous and home. And in the morning, Emma would wake early and make biscuits, just like she did almost every day, and Yates would come in from his work to find breakfast waiting and his wife smiling. It was a simple life in many ways, built on small daily acts of love and care. Biscuits and coffee. Mended clothes and planted gardens. Shared work and shared dreams. But those small acts had accumulated over 20 years into something magnificent, something that would last long after they were gone. Their children would remember. Their grandchildren would carry on the traditions. And somewhere in the future, someone might tell the story of how it all began, with a woman desperate enough to break into a stranger's house, with a man lonely enough to take a chance on letting her stay, with biscuits made on a desperate morning that somehow changed two lives forever. Emma stirred beside him. "We should go to bed. Morning comes early." "It does," Yates agreed, but he did not move yet. "Emma." "Yes, I love you. I do not say it enough, but I do, more than I have words for." She lifted her head to look at him, her eyes reflecting starlight. "I know. You show me every day in 1,000 different ways, but I love hearing it too." She kissed his cheek. "I love you, Yates Callahan. Thank you for being the man who did not turn me away. Thank you for being the woman brave enough to come through my door." They finally went inside and to bed, curled together in the darkness the way they had been for 20 years. Yates listened to Emma's breathing slow and even out as she fell asleep, and he thought about the morning she had first slept under his roof, how he had stood guard all night worried about the men following her. How different that night had been from this one, surrounded by family instead of facing danger alone, but the core feeling was the same. Then and now, he felt protective and grateful, and somewhat amazed that she had chosen him. That out of all the houses she could have stumbled into that desperate morning, she had found his. That his door had been unlocked. That he had been the kind of man who would offer shelter instead of turning her away. Luck, maybe. Or fate. Or just the strange random collision of two people who needed each other at exactly the right moment. Whatever it was, Yates was grateful for it with everything in him. He fell asleep, holding his wife with his children safe in their rooms and grandchildren visiting, and a life so full of love it sometimes overwhelmed him. And in the morning, Emma would wake early and make biscuits, just like that first morning 20 years ago. Except now, she made them in a kitchen that was truly hers, in a house full of family, for a husband who had long since forgotten what it felt like to be alone. The biscuits that first morning had been an act of desperate hope, an attempt to feel safe in the middle of fear. But every morning since they had been an act of love, a small daily proof that Emma Gray Callahan was home and intended to stay. And Yates would never take that for granted. Not for a single day. Not for the rest of his life. Because she had made biscuits that first morning, and by the third supper, he had forgotten he ever lived alone. And in the 20 years since, he had built a life so full of light and love and family that the dark, lonely years before Emma seemed like something that had happened to someone else entirely. This was his life now. This warmth and noise and chaos. This woman beside him and the children they had raised and the grandchildren who were just beginning. This ranch they had built together into something that would last. All of it, every beautiful, messy, complicated part of it, had started with biscuits and a woman brave enough to try making them while her world was falling apart. And Yates fell asleep smiling, already looking forward to morning when Emma would rise before dawn and start the day the way she always did. With flour and lard and salt and honey. With capable hands and a heart full of love. With biscuits that were so much more than food. They were home. They were family. They were everything that mattered. And in the morning when Yates came in from his work and found breakfast waiting, he would bite into one of those biscuits and taste 20 years of love and partnership and shared life. He would look at his wife across the table and remember the frightened woman covered in flour who had stood in this exact spot. And he would be grateful all over again that she had chosen his door to knock on, his kitchen to stumble into, his life to become part of. Because some mornings changed everything. And that first morning, when Emma Gray made biscuits in a stranger's kitchen while running for her life, had changed absolutely everything for both of them. Had taken two people living half lives and made them whole. Had created something beautiful and lasting out of fear and desperation, and a simple act of trying to feel safe. 20 years later, surrounded by family and love and everything they had built together, Yates and Emma both knew the truth. Home was not a place. Home was biscuits on a desperate morning and the courage to keep trying. Home was a stranger who became a wife, who became a partner in building something that would last. Home was this house and this ranch and these people and this life. And it had all started with flour and hope, and a woman who made biscuits the first morning. And by the third supper, the cowboy forgot he ever lived alone.